I'd just like to invite all of our speakers to the stage, please. Everybody that's presented today. I'm conscious young Somerset sadly aren't with us now. Stefan, Frank, Manley. And yeah, just want to leave it as an open floor now, really. So our microphone guys, if you're prepared, please, and either side of the room. We've already got one hand straight up, straight away. I'd kind of like us to just think about what have we heard, what are the challenges ahead, and our call to actions. And again, if I can ask everybody to just introduce themselves and where they're from, please. Thank you. Baz.
Baz. Baz, MOD. Slightly maybe a different view on today, and thank you everybody for the participation and the speakers. There's been a lot of talk today about tools, and what tools do we need for resilience and all that sort of stuff, and just from experience, I tend to find that, sadly, the sad reality is some of the strongest and best contributing factors for resilience are hardship, loss and failure. So what do you think of that? What are your thoughts on looking at the other side of the resilience piece?
I'll start off, if I might. Maybe my belief isn't what you expect in the response, because I believe you can be resilient without having had to go through trauma or hardship. I don't think it's just about that. I think it's a bigger element of your internal concept of your mindset, an element of genetics too. I'd like to say I'm quite resilient because of a character and my professional life as a professional sailor and taking teams of people into hurricanes and stuff, but also I think I've had an easy life in that sense. When I speak to, yes, we all have our problems, we all have our tests, shall we say, but yes, it's an interesting one, because I've had some few debates on this. It can make, it's like the sink or swim of a swimming pool. You don't build resilience by being thrown in, it's your reaction being thrown in that's where the resilience comes from. Did you sink or did you learn to swim? You didn't have that wasn't taught, that would be within you before you hit the water. It's certainly my philosophy on it when I'm thinking about it. So I don't think the conversation should be around how tough have you had it, therefore how can you now become resilient? It's what are the general tools of resilience? What are the mindsets, the physical bit? The community has always come up really strong around resilience. And I think if we focus on all those other elements, the 7 factors that Frank, you shared, there's some really powerful ones in there. The self-compassion, for example, that sense of community, the sense of purpose in your life. That's the source of resilience, I believe, as opposed to just the hardship itself. That's my perspective and thoughts.
Thank you.
I don't think I have anything else to really add to what you just said, Manley. I don't think it's only about having had hardship and learned to overcome it. But you can't have a life which has no challenges in it. If you've been completely mollycoddled, then I don't think you would develop resilience. But having a stable, supportive, really nice, in many ways, close to ideal upbringing, and not having lots of disasters and lots of loss and lots of traumas or wars or whatever it is going on in life, that's great. You don't need to have all that horrible stuff in order to develop resilience. The people who survive those really adverse circumstances, they have developed resilience through other things. They have developed the ability to kind of compensate, adapt, accommodate, move on, and not get completely overwhelmed by that adversity. So you need to be building resilience in order to cope with adversity.
I think for me it's very much the lived experience thing, but I think everything's a theory until it's tested. And in my view is some things I learned through being taught, and then obviously that's great, but some things I learned the hard way by being chucked in the deep end. But the thing for me was, when I was in the deep end, I wasn't on my own, and I think that's the reactions. I think on my own, there's no way I could have achieved any of these things. To be honest, I don't know any successful person who managed to get through something horrific that had done that on their own. So it just kind of goes back to that importance of when you're in a deep end, having people there that can actually guide you through and provide the education as you're learning the hard way. But yeah, experience definitely counts for a lot.
Thank you, Baz. There's something there for me, Baz, about what you're saying about tools and how they come at different times. Maybe not being thrown in the water and seeing whether you can swim straight away, but also who's there to chuck the rope and where those ropes are coming from when you're in the deep end, really. So again, there's that collective element at times of trauma or at times of adversity that can change our outcomes, I think. Yeah. Thank you. Brilliant question. Any more questions, please? I hope there are, because we're just getting going. Thank you.
Thanks. It's Joe from the Fire Service again. I wanted to ask about something that hasn't really come up, which is, I guess, a little bit abstract, but to do with masculinity and certainty. So there's a sort of stereotype of certain guys where you have to be very know-it-all and have an answer for everything. And sometimes that's positive because it means being decisive, which is very useful in the fire service. But I was struck by Stefan's story that his turning point really came when he realised that he didn't know what to do, he wasn't certain about things. And I'd like to ask the panel, are there ways that you can reframe uncertainty into a positive thing so that it doesn't have to reach a crisis point?
Are there ways to reframe uncertainty? Catch it before it becomes a crisis? Yeah? What a question.
Brilliant question. I think this is where the importance of open communication, and like I said, it's like doing the right thing even if it's embarrassing. That's where that comes in, and instilling an atmosphere where people aren't afraid to admit that they don't know something is a good way to start. Obviously, some of the leaders that I've had, if we're in a situation where all hell broke loose and nobody wasn't quite sure, it's like, right lads, what do we do? Any ideas, you know? And then it's like, no, because ultimately it's life and death at the end of the day. And there's nothing worse than somebody who thinks they know it all and then end up costing life as a result.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, my wife, and this expression called mansplaining, isn't there? We seem to just say something with confidence as though we're right. It's a real danger. Humility. Recognising ex-service as well. It's not just in that situation, but there's so many situations where we may think we have an idea. I think from a leadership perspective, one of the problems we have is that leaders think they need to come up with a solution. Whereas if we're leaders, if we rephrase that and just say, all we need to do is facilitate the solution, then we're in a much better place. Because rather than just my experience and my brain, if we're collectively facilitating the solution, we've got 50 brains, 50 life experiences. And that's the bit that you were saying as well, Stefan, which makes it much more plausible. The danger is we want to come over as confident people too, and their expectations, Joe, as you were saying in the fire, that you don't want hesitancy, you want people to go forward, but you also don't want the false confidence, which then becomes life-threatening and dangerous. So be able to do that as a leader and lead with humility under big pressure. As you say, I don't know the solution team, but I know collectively we'll get there. What's it to be? I think that is the most important aspect for us all to learn, as men sometimes particularly, to move away from that male overconfidence part. Yeah, nice one.
Yeah, I think if you are jumping straight in with a solution, you're probably not giving it sufficient thought. And even in an emergency situation, you might end up doing what is a less optimal action, whatever it is, you know, you haven't thought it through. So sometimes it'll have to be very quick, but getting other people's views and then coming to a sensible strategy and agreeing on that and acting on that is going to have better outcomes. So welcoming uncertainty is what I urge, is that you accept that it's okay to be uncertain and that you then use as an opportunity to think through the options and then come up with a solution. So it's uncertainty at any time is a potential for positive change or for positive direction.
Thank you, gentlemen. Yeah, absolutely. I really like the elements there of facilitating masculinity from your question, really, that, you know, again, we've heard again, how important the use of language is here today, and in what we're doing, and what we're talking about, facilitating masculinity. I really like that. That's that's pulling together a little bit.
Facilitating the ideas.
Yes, facilitating the ideas around masculinity as opposed to sort of just the kind of toxicity or anything else that's around it is, I think, can be really helpful, but also welcoming uncertainty as well was brought up there, which is something, it's just acknowledging it in the moment, isn't it, and naming it in the moment.
And if you're worried about uncertainty, a challenge you could always make is, when was it ever certain?
Yes.
When has there ever been certainty?
Absolutely.
And being flexible is part of being resilient and adaptive and doing
And so that goes back to the skyscraper that we saw in Frank's presentation, that huge solid structure, the tallest in the world, but the top of it is flexible and it still bends and moves. And even within our rigidity of services and structured thinking, we have to be able to make the system flexible for the people we're supporting. Lovely, thank you.
Hi, Charlie Hull, NHS. Can I ask you your view as to whether our societal reliance on smartphone technology, resilience, is more hindrance than help? Can I ask you please not to sit on the fence on this? I get increasingly frustrated with how we must all be using them to be on. And there's an app for this and an app for that, and it's a useful tool, and we must all use it, and we want to speak about it, etc. And that affects my mental health quite badly. And I'm sure it does, maybe, particularly in light of the adolescence, that film we've all seen, and we all know what the root cause of that problem was. So I would like to ask you all, hindrance or help, please, gents, smartphone, please try and civil defence.
Thank you. So we weren't all hesitating because we're sitting on the fence. The right person.
Tossing a coin.
So you can see I'm grey-haired. I'm not a digital native myself. So it is difficult to understand what it's like to grow up today in today's society, where this is just part of everyday life. But it also gives you a bit of perspective, I think, looking in. And I'm also a scientist. As a psychologist, I believe in evidence. And so I think it is right also to be looking for the evidence and responding based on that. And the evidence is starting to be clearer. And I'm not sitting on the fence on this one. I have a firm opinion myself that's not helpful and on balance. But I left the NHS, took early retirement, to go into the digital mental health world, and it's a new frontier. It's a very exciting thing to be involved in, and it has huge potential. So digital delivery, apps, etc., when they work, when people engage with them, they can achieve incredibly good therapeutic outcomes. It makes, what you're otherwise doing in a one-to-one session as a clinician possible to be scaled to lots and lots of people, to help lots of people. It's potentially really valuable. Digital world can also be the really a very positive environment for some people, and people find their tribe, they find their group that they feel comfortable with. Maybe if they were in some isolated little village in Somerset, they wouldn't meet anyone like themselves. But online, they can find somebody who's just like them, and they can get enormous validation and support as a result of that. So digital networks are incredibly powerful and have really positive effects too. And so I think there are lots of things which are, and the information the digital age puts at our fingertips. With my employee mental health company I was working with for a while, setting up services with them, I wrote a little, a chatbot, if you like, that employees would respond to a questionnaire about their mental health, and it responded. I programmed it to respond and have a reasonable conversation with the employee and then direct them to the right resources. Fantastic stuff you couldn't have imagined 10, 15, 20 years ago. On the other hand, most kids and a lot of adults get so much stress, anxiety, trauma related to things that happen online. If there's bullying, it carries on 24/7. If they are feeling less certain about themselves, or they feel that they are not as good as their peers, or they're ostracized, or they feel low in the pecking order, social media reinforces that. If you see, as an adult, even if you haven't grown up with it like myself, if I see all those holiday snaps that everyone's on with, then I start thinking, why aren't I having as many good holidays as that? You know, we all do that social comparison, and it's harmful. But for children, as Neil was saying earlier, if they get hooked, probably some of you do this just like I do sometimes. I try to avoid doing it too often. But it's so easy to pick the phone up and just scroll through and see what's happening and like a few things, or spot something and think, I should try and comment on that. And then how do I phrase that? And then you look later, has anyone noticed that I've made the effort to do this? Yeah, you get caught up in this stuff. And it's getting in the way of real life.
How many other people liked it?
Yeah, how many other people like it? But for children, they become more and more focused on that. So I think it can be beneficial, but it needs to be, if you like, rationed. It needs to be kept within limits. And I would not allow smartphones into schools. If my kids were growing up, my 3 kids have left home, but if I had young kids now, I would be having the phones not available at a certain time of the evening onwards. The phone is the last thing at night or on. Well, I heard a report on the radio, I think it was. The kids at a school it was primary school, they handed their phones in to the teachers, so that was a good thing in my opinion, at the start of school, and then collected them from the secure box or whatever on the way home. And one of the children had left her phone there overnight. And the next day the teacher found the phone still there and picked it up or whatever and saw that there were over 1,000 messages that this child had had, as a primary school kid, from her class WhatsApp group. So that night, that class had sent each other 1,000 messages, that cohort. That's crazy. That's just out of control. And it's harmful. It's going to be harming people's brains. And us as a species, we become less attentive to the environment. So that's one of the things.
Sounds worse than an NHS email or something.
And just a little thought on that. Now, I knew Frank would have the right answer to this one, so you were quite safe there. There's a lovely expression saying that boredom is the birthplace of creativity. And that's the danger, that kids particularly, and ourselves, adults too, don't allow ourselves to get bored. We're just flicking around. And there's a Buddhist philosophy that says our brain is like our mind is like a pool of water. And every interruption is like throwing a stone in. And each stone creates its own ripples. And with the permanent lights, and there's knocks on the doors, and emails, and notifications, and LinkedIn, and WhatsApp, and all the others, it's like throwing in handfuls of gravel and stone after stone. And the water becomes so confused that we actually can't see, we don't have clarity. What would your grandmother say if you had a problem you couldn't solve? What expression would she use? Sleep on it. In other words, stop. Don't think about it. Let your mind sort itself out. I think that's one of the big dangers.
Only again experience, I've got a daughter that's nearly 15, and we're having this very conversation. She made a comment the other day with regards to the fact that her brain is working overtime. She's got so much on her mind. And I said, well, get off your phone then. So it's limiting screen time, which is what I do for all the kids, but obviously it's just vital, but it's almost it's how you use it and what you use is pretty much what I keep saying to her. It's like, yes, it's a tool that you can make use of, and it's useful for schoolwork or whatever, but things like your Snapchats and Facebooks and all this other stuff, I mean, I can't stand it, by the way, but it's just, it's just trying to educate again, and at the moment we seem to be making good headway with that, but we'll give it a couple more weeks before I probably have my head torn off.
I'm not going to sit on the fence. I'm going to reinforce where Frank was coming from. That actually, the elements and the development of AI now and electronic sort of forward thinking, which is faster than the human brain and clearer and unbiased if we channel it in the right direction, is absolutely something we should embrace and evolve with, in my opinion. The governance of what safe use is, and we've heard the evidence already, we're sharing the NSPCC's elements. I mean, the fact that the NSPCC produce a document and say the blue screen is addictive to the child's brain as crack cocaine to the adult's brain, how that isn't the front page of media and we weren't kind of responding to that, and then the government haven't responded to that and governed our social media giants, our communication networks, WhatsApp, SnapGP, Facebook, all of them should have a legal and moral responsibility to govern that and to measure that. It shouldn't just be down to the children and the families who are otherwise unable to do that. So that's my opinion. Thank you.
Off the fence.
I hope that was off the fence. Yes. Any further questions for the panel, please? Yeah, lovely.
We've been talking, from mine, we've been talking about resilience and where to start. What's your opinion on the closure of resilience?
Sorry, can you explain what you mean by the closure of resilience?
When we get to the end of the journey we're going on.
When we get buried or
when you get to find the end of what your mental health journey is going, how do you see
that's
it?
your journey of life, isn't it?
Mm.
Okay. Yeah.
Your mental health journey is your journey of life. It's just like a physical health journey.
Right. Yeah. So coming together with endings of physical or mental health and finding that kind of closure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I hope that's not too flippant an answer, but I don't think it comes to an end. It's not a process that ends. It's an ongoing process.
Manley, you mentioned in your speech about no, was it yours? No, it wasn't. It was the Young Somerset presenter. Sorry, mentioned resilience being about a journey, the process. Yeah, about resilience being a process. So I think where do processes start and end? And do they continue through our life journey?
Yeah.
Did you want to say something? Yeah.
I think if I understand correctly, do you mean so if you're facing a challenge and you go through the challenge and that challenge comes to an end, and then what then?
Yeah.
So my experience from that, you saw that cycle, it's like the moving forward, it's like getting to the end of that particular challenge, but obviously, like Frank said there, life is life, so to me it's just a case of, right, let's take stock, let's have that moment to just rest. What have I learned from this? What can I put in my toolbox? What wasn't useful? And then when the next thing comes along, which inevitably it will, I've got that learned experience that I can lean on for whatever comes next.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, David from Mind. Just want to find out, it's possibly a bit controversial, I'm not sure if I should say the microphone really, but basically I was working throughout the lockdown as a mental health worker, visiting people in the community who were isolating. And something which I was very concerned about was the amount of young people who were having to stay at home and be homeschooled on Zoom. I was just wondering, do you feel there's much conversation at the moment as to the impacts of the lockdowns on young people's mental health in particular, and young men's mental health? Is there much talk about that at all, do you feel?
I'll come in that first, if I may. No, which is why Steve exists and why we're here. So at the beginning of the pandemic, I'll share a bit of myself and my professional journey. At the beginning of the pandemic, on the 1st of April 2020, I started work for CAMHS Liaison in Musgrove Park Hospital, and I started developing and managing a new CAMHS Liaison service across Musgrove Hospital and Yeovil Hospital. In my first 3 months in position, I saw 6 people in 3 months. I walked into A&Es that had 0 patients in. It was completely, it was Groundhog Day and very, very unprecedented, a word that was overused in the pandemic, but just changed times that we'd never ever experienced before. The president of the Royal College of Psychiatry said at the time, in response to the government's lockdown, and this is what's going to happen, he said, financially, The country will recover from this in the next 2 to 3 years. Physical health will recover from it in its first year because we'll deal with the virus and move on. Financially, 2 to 3 years. Mental health services will be reeling for the next decade from the impact of this lockdown and this pandemic. What we collectively as mental health services and the whole of services underestimated. So think of the impact that lockdown had on you individually and each of us individually. What we didn't predict, you remember that step from junior school to secondary school and how huge that was from the age of 10 to 11? That was a large enough step in itself. Plus, given the fact that physiologically we're then going through puberty and there's huge amounts of changes happening for us. Now take yourself back to when you were 8 and then imagine that step straight to secondary school. Now take yourself back to the age 7 and imagine that step to secondary school. It was enormous, it is enormous, and that young developmental age of 7 to 9 we did not predict coming at all. And we sent them to secondary school, and the referral rates to CAM services across this country increased tenfold in a year, overnight. CAM services across our country now have more referrals of any healthcare service, like through the roof. We didn't see that coming. Nobody saw that coming. NHS England didn't see that, the ICB didn't see that, the psychiatrists didn't see that. So just to share that as a kind of, that's what's happened post-pandemic, and it's something that we've heard about early intervention, we've heard about the need to involve education and to start at a very young age. No, we're not talking about it enough, and no, we're not doing things. We are talking about the fact we need to learn at a young age, but we need to be taking those actions ourselves and bringing the education authorities to account for that, and helping the government to make those changes. And perhaps the men's health strategy will help that for boys. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
You got that one nailed.
Okay. Nice one, thank you. Any other questions for the panels, guys?
Do I have a microphone?
Yes.
Thank you. Hello. I'm deaf and my sign language interpreter is going to voice for me. My name is Matt and I work at Deaf Camps with young people and children. Say hello. It's a fantastic conference. It's been so interesting and meeting so many professionals from all these different companies, all these different services. It's been really, really interesting. And listening to your varied experiences there as the keynote speakers has been fascinating as well. And so we've been talking about the changes over the years that have been happening, to the 90s to the 2000s as we go through. But in your experiences, so if we look back at the mental health services now and compare them to now, what would you say is the one thing that's been really successful that we should carry on with? What would you say is the gaps? So just in your own personal experience, I'd be really interested to know.
So there's two parts to that question, yeah? So one, what's the experiences of moving forwards, and then what's the gaps?
Yes. Yeah.
Frank?
I'll give my own perspective on this. I think what's been really successful is developing more specialist teams to meet the needs of particular groups of people. What has also been successful is involving families more. I don't know to what extent it's still a major part of the way in which mental health services operate, but that's certainly one of the things I contributed while I was in Suncorp for many years. And working with families in partnership and working through families, working with parents so they help their kids, I think is something which is continuing to grow, and it's also something which I'm continuing now to do myself, working with parents to help their kids with neurodiversity. And the other thing that I think is powerful and is the co-production and the peer work. That's something which wasn't in the health service before. And I think having support from people who know what you're going through and can, if you like, provide you with ongoing support and guidance because they know what it's like to be struggling with X, Y, or Z. problems is hugely powerful. And so it's about, if you like, demedicalizing the services, not making them diagnosis focused and treatment focused, and not only using it with medical treatment model, but using more psychosocial models of care. That's where I'm going to stop. I think those are positive things. Whether they've gone far enough is a different matter.
Yeah, that's fine.
Lovely, thank you. I'll leave it there. I think some really rich conversations. Thank you very much to our panel, ladies and gentlemen.